I used to love going trick-or-treating when I was a kid. I would always plan my costume a good month ahead of time, and always looked forward to when it was time to get dressed up. I have nothing but fond memories of trick-or-treating, at least until the fall of 1998. I was 10 years old at the time. I went over to my friend's house to meet up with a group of friends. There were 3 of us that went together. We met at my friend Troy's house that evening and did it for a reason. There was a house not far from Troy's house that we wanted to visit. The story or legend or whatever goes that there's an old woman that lives in this house. It's an old house and creepy enough looking on its own. She had lived there by herself for a long time, and I'm sure that's why her house looked that way. But the reason she lives alone is because she killed her family. She poisoned them one by one until they were all gone. Somehow she managed to get away with it, and they were all thought to have died by sickness or natural causes. Anyway, there's a rumor that if you knock on her door during trick or treat, she will reach her hand out and give you a piece of candy. But if you eat the candy, you will get sick and die because it is poisoned. I already knew that this was probably all made up, but it was still a fun idea when I was 10. Every year, her porch light was off. Obviously, she wasn't trying to participate in the trick-or-treating, but if you knocked on her door anyway, you would get a special piece of candy. So, naturally, being 10 years old, we wanted to go to her house. First, though, we needed to go to all of the regular houses to get our candy. We were saving her house for last. Everything was normal during the first part of our trick-or-treating. We walked around from house to house and loaded our bags up like every other year. When it got towards the end of the time period to go to the houses, we headed back to Troy's house to drop our bags off. We then headed to the old lady's house. By this time, there weren't many kids left walking around to the houses. We got to the old lady's house a few minutes after 8, which was right after the trick-or-treating ended. We were all daring each other to go up to the house, but no one wanted to. It all sounded like a good idea until we were standing in front of the house. It was dark and quiet on the part of the street we were on. It was really eerie once we were standing there. I found 3 sticks and broke them into pieces to create 2 long ones and 1 short one. It was my idea, and it was a bad one because I ended up drawing the short stick. I immediately became nervous and had a sinking feeling come over me that only made things worse. I walked up to the house. I couldn't chicken out in front of my friends. I stood on the porch for a good 30 seconds before I finally gathered the courage to actually knock on the door. Once I knocked, I heard movement coming from inside. My heart began to race, and I was secretly hoping no one would answer the door. I could hear someone walking around inside, but no one came to the door. My friends were egging me on to knock again, and with regret, I did. Again, there was more movement inside, but no one came to the door again. Finally, we decided to just leave, much to my happiness. I felt great getting the heck out of there. We went back to Troy's house, where eventually my friend Mike suggested we go back to her house again. He said that if she didn't give us a treat, she was subject to getting a trick pulled on her. We were 10, so the only thing we could think of was TPing her house. Troy agreed excitedly with Mike when it came to his plan. Although I really didn't think it was a good idea, I again didn't want to look like the chicken of the group. Troy went and gathered enough toilet paper to give each of us 3 rolls. We waited until it was a bit later in the night, so hopefully no one would drive by and see us. We were all spending the night at Troy's house, so neither Mike or myself had to be home at a certain time or anything. Once it was almost 10, we quietly snuck out of Troy's house and headed over. The walk back over to the house was filled with jokes and laughter, but I could still feel the tension between all of us. Not only did we sneak out, which could get us in trouble, but we were going to be TPing a house, something none of us had done before. And I also knew all of us were nervous about going back to that particular house. Once we finally arrived, we decided to scope things out first. The house was still dark inside like earlier. But with the movement we heard in the house when I had knocked on the door, we knew someone could still be in there. We looked around, and overall it seemed like the coast was clear. We began throwing the toilet paper up into the trees. We were all laughing, while simultaneously telling each other to be quiet. Those 9 total rolls of toilet paper ended up going a long way, and we were pretty satisfied with our work. We took off running and made it back to Troy's house relatively fast. When we got there, we snuck in through the back door. We made it in as quietly as possible and headed into Troy's living room so we could get to the basement. Unfortunately, Troy's dad was sitting in the living room, apparently waiting for us. We all froze and realized we were totally busted. I think we were all ready to cry at this point, but to our surprise, his dad actually wasn't very mad. He took us by surprise again by asking us whose house we'd just TP'd. We both looked at Troy, unsure of what we were supposed to tell his dad, but Troy took the pressure off of us by telling his dad the truth. He had a very disappointed look on his face, but also started to laugh a bit. We were obviously pretty confused at this point and still worried we were going to get into trouble. His dad went on to reveal why he was laughing, and it sent a chill down my spine. He told us that the house we TP'd had been abandoned for at least a year. Apparently, the old woman who had lived there died about a year ago. Whoever ended up with the property just hadn't done anything with it yet. I didn't mention the footsteps I heard to him. I just wanted to pretend it never even happened and that I was just imagining everything. His dad told us to be good and that he had to go to bed. We headed down to the basement to go watch TV. Once we were down there, Troy told us that we were actually going to head back to that house once he thought his dad was asleep. I didn't want to go, but he brought up the noise we heard after I knocked. He insisted it must have been a ghost and we needed to go back to the house to check it out. I definitely wanted no part of it, but if Troy went, I had to go. It was his house and I couldn't just hang out there without him. Plus, like I mentioned before, I was 10 and really didn't want to be labeled as a coward. So, about 45 minutes later, we headed over to the house for the 3rd time. It was getting close to midnight by the time we made it back there. We approached the house and started looking through the windows. I thought we were just going to look into the windows and try to listen for more sounds, but then Troy started trying to actually open the windows. He went around the house, trying window after window, and the doors too when he passed by them. I was hoping they would all be locked and we would go back to his house. But, to my dismay, he found one that was unlocked. He slid it open and turned to us with a huge grin on his face. He asked us if we were ready to go inside. I was hoping that Mike would be opposed to the idea, but unfortunately he wanted to go in too. I asked them, what if it was an actual person inside? Troy told me not to be a chicken and that we would be fine. We went into the house, and at first, it really did look like someone had still been living there. But soon, we were able to see all the dust on everything with the flashlight Troy brought. Unfortunately, he could only find one flashlight, but it was better than nothing. We continued looking around downstairs for a few minutes. It really did look like no one had been inside the place for a year. This had me partially relieved, but also partially freaked out. If it wasn't a person, then what was making that noise earlier? Suddenly, we all froze when we heard what sounded like someone moving around upstairs. I looked at my 2 friends with an expression of, what do we do? Troy suggested that we go upstairs. I told him no way. I didn't care at this point if I looked like a chicken or not. I just wanted to leave. My friends were relentless though. They kept egging me on and said we would be safe if all 3 of us stuck together. I finally gave in, and we began creeping up the stairs. I was waiting to hear more movement, but besides our footsteps creaking on the stairs, it seemed pretty quiet. Once we made it to the 2nd floor, we continued looking around. It still appeared to be furnished upstairs, just like the 1st floor. We made it to the bedroom at the end of the hallway, and my blood went cold. As soon as we looked at the bed, We all looked at each other in fear and panic. The bed had a sleeping bag on it, along with a pillow and a gym bag. It appeared as if someone had been staying here recently. Before we could even decide what to do next, we heard obvious footsteps coming from above us in what could have only been the attic. Finally, Troy admitted that we needed to get out of there. We all rushed out of the bedroom and into the hallway. Right at that same moment, the stairs from the attic dropped down in front of us. We saw a pair of legs begin to descend them. We had just enough space to pass by the stairs one by one. Troy rushed by them first, then me, and Mike was last. By the time he was passing the stairs, a hand reached down and grabbed him. We all began screaming, and Troy and I grabbed onto Mike and began pulling on him. After several seconds, we were able to free Mike from the man's grip. It was obvious it was a man by just seeing what his hands looked like, despite him not uttering a word to us. We ran down the stairs and climbed through the already open window. Again, we ran all the way back to Troy's house. We were about to go inside, but decided we needed to call the police. We knew that if we called from Troy's house, they would be able to see where we were calling from, so we decided to walk down to the end of the block and use the payphone in the convenience store parking lot. Troy was the one that called. The operator for 911 was asking Troy a lot of questions, but he would only tell them what happened and where the house was at. He hung up the phone and we hurried back to his house. This time, we were able to sneak back in without either of his parents knowing we were ever gone. We had to wait a week until the local newspaper in our town came out. In the crime blotter, we discovered that the police did indeed go check the house out. It said the police responded to a disturbance at the location we were at. Inside, they didn't find anyone staying there, but there was evidence that someone had been squatting at the place illegally. Whoever it was must have feared we were going to call the police, and with good reason because we did. The newspaper said the police also found crack pipes and other forms of drug paraphernalia. So apparently, knocking on the door must have freaked out whoever was staying there. Us coming into the house probably did as well. I'm guessing once the guy heard us talking upstairs about getting out of there, he realized we were just kids. I can only imagine why he would try to stop us from leaving at that point, but I would have to guess he was willing to do whatever to make sure we stayed quiet. What lengths would he have gone to ensure that? I don't know, and I try not to think about it. That night scarred me for quite some time, and a man who was likely in a drug-fueled rage could have done anything, and I know it. We were stupid kids, and that was a long time ago. But it was still the scariest moment of my entire life.